I've got time for us to begin. If y'all are ready. And I've got time to begin if you're not. Good to see all of you tonight. We are in the book of 1 Samuel. We got through chapter 7 last week, although we hurried some there at the end. But I want to go back to something that we looked at in the class last week in chapter number 6. We'll start there, and then after that we'll go into chapter 8. What I have for us tonight is chapters 8 through 12. We probably won't finish that. We may take tonight and then also next week to finish that section. But I went ahead and put them together because I thought it would fit together well, and when we get to that I'll explain my reasoning. What I want to do is go back to chapter 6 and verse number 19. And you probably remember this if you were in the class last week. After the ark was brought back by the Philistines, or sent back by the Philistines, you remember they built a cart, they put the ark on it, put 5 golden statues of tumors and rats, put that on the ark, or the cart with the ark as well, hooked it to 2 cows that had calves, and you know their idea was that if those cows pull it back into Israel, it's obvious that God is behind this. If they don't, then it's just coincidence. And of course, the cows made a straight line to Beth Shemesh. And when the people of Beth Shemesh saw it coming, they were rejoiced. But there was also in verse number 19 that there were some people who looked into the ark, and God killed them because of their irreverence. Now, I mentioned in the kind of the summary of the chapter that 70 had looked into the ark and God killed them because of that. And Ruby pointed out that the Bible she's reading said 50,070. And that's a little bit different. It's a difference of about 50,000, isn't it? And so then I looked at my Bible, and it says 50,070. And my first thought was, yeah, I'm sorry, I was speaking like a mathematician, because 50,070 is what? 50,000.7, right? And I didn't want to make it that way. But yeah, that's a different subject. We're not going to get into that tonight. My first thought was, how did I miss that? Exactly. So let me tell you how I missed it. I didn't read out of this Bible when I was doing my reading. I read from the NIV. And the NIV says 70, as does, I think, the English Standard. And a lot of the newer translations say 70, whereas the King James, the New King James, the New American Standard have 50,070. The New American Standard has a footnote that says that many manuscripts say 70. So what I wanted to do is look at that. The reason is because of the ancient manuscripts. And that was my first thought after I realized how I missed it and how I, didn't see 50,000 there, because that's a big number to miss. But those manuscripts, some of them had 70. Some of them have 50,070. But now, also the Masoretic text, that's the one that the King James is taken from, and the New King James. The phrase in Hebrew is written in such a way that it's 70 men and then put together with the word 50,000 men. So it's like a compound word. There are 2 ways you can take that. One, you add them together and get what you get in the King James, New King James, New American Standard. Or it could be interpreted as 70 out of 50,000. Which, okay, is that? Oh, that's the way you interpret it, okay. All right, and so that's a possibility. There were 50,000 men in the area, 70 of them were killed. But it's also possible that the difference in the manuscript from the original to the one that has 50,000 in it may have been one of the scribes who was copying it. There could have been a notation in the margin, and it ended up in the text. It could have been a misreading, and you see those. And if you want, I don't know if I have that next or not. I've got one other thought. Let me go into that because I think it's important to put this in at this point. Eric Lyons has a really, really good article on the Apologetics Press website entitled Death at Beth-Shemesh. It's in the section under alleged discrepancies. I don't know if you can see it from your seat, but if you're looking up here, there's a whole section on the website, alleged discrepancies, and they're listed under the books. So, for example, if you're looking at a passage in the book of Matthew, and you're reading something, they're alleging that the Bible's made a mistake there. You can go and see if there's something written on the AP website, and probably there is. You may also be familiar with, there's 3 volumes now, The Anvil Rings, and Eric is the one who put that together. I think he wrote most of it, where he deals with a lot of alleged discrepancies. This is one on the passage in 1 Samuel chapter 6, and he gives about 3 different possibilities to deal with that. One, that there were actually 50,070 men killed. Now let me back up to this one. Because Beth-Shemesh was a small town. And the idea of there being 50,070 men killed just seems like that's a really big number. One of the things that Eric does in the article is point out that there's a small town, relatively small town in central Alabama that at least once a year, over 200,000 people will all go there. And they'll sit and watch cars go around in circles. You know what town we're talking about? Talladega, yeah. Now, if somebody who didn't know about the race heard that there were over 200,000 people in Talladega, they'd say, there's not that many people there. But there is at least one weekend out of the year. And so there's the possibility that for whatever reason, and one way that he deals with that is we're not told how long it was from the time the ark got back until these men were killed. Just a reading of the text seems like it's the same day, but it may not have been the same day. And so you can read that. It's a really good article. It gives you a whole lot of different perspectives on the text and ways in which it is not a discrepancy or it's not something that is out of character with what would be reasonable. This suggests the possibility that a judgment of 70 as opposed to 50,070 fits the passage a whole lot better. And so to suggest a copyist error or something like that would make more sense. And let me add this real quick, and then your question or comment. To suggest a copyist error is not in any way to say that the Bible has error or that the Bible made a mistake. Those are pretty evident. A lot of times when you read that, you see very clearly. When the writer of the book of 1 Samuel wrote, he wrote what God intended. That's the idea of inspiration. All right. No, it just that they made a straight journey there, and so however long it would take to transgress. Well, we know that the 5 lords of the Philistines followed it because they saw what was done. And then when the people at Beth-Shemesh saw it, I mean, what's the first thing you're going to do if you see something like that happening? Here's the Ark of the Covenant. How many of those are there? There's just one. Was it important in the life of Israel? It was very important in the life of Israel. So what are you going to do? You're going to let people know about it. Yeah. There could have been, certainly. There's no question. Yeah. Yeah. And all of that is a part of the explanation of the number. And so it could be 50,070. In fact, one of the commentaries that I use in preparing says that it seems that that was in the original, that was the correct number. And if that's the case, then does it sound like it's a large number? It sure does. But is it impossible? It's certainly not.
Was the ark on the cart the whole time?
We don't know. We know at one point they took it off the ark and put it on a stone, this is verse 18, that remains to this day in the field of Joshua of Bethshemesh, the day in which this book was written.
But if it was hard to see, I mean, who took the top off? You know?
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to look in it when somebody
Mhm.
takes the top
Mhm.
off? And I go back to what I said a while ago. I think that 70 might have been the ones that did look into it.
Mhm.
I wouldn't be surprised if there were 50,000 people
Right.
around, but
Which then fits with how the way you were saying you would interpret it, that 50,000 there, of those 50,000, 70 were killed. And that would make sense as well. And that explains the large number, and yet only 70 of them put to death. I think this is just based on my own looking at it. The fact that when Uzzah touched the ark, what happened to him? God struck him dead. It plants within me the idea that if you touch the ark, you're going to be struck dead. That's not necessarily the case. Just because it happened to Uzzah, these 70 could have come. They took the lid off. They touched it to do that. Let me ask you a question. If the men who took the lid off were struck dead immediately, what are you going to do? I'm going to back away from it too. Yeah. So at least you and I would have survived, you know. So it could be that over the course of however long it was, a day, a month, 2 days, whatever, God allowed them to continue doing what they were doing, and at some point then struck dead those who were irreverent. Anthony? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, right, many is in italics, but you say 70 is not a great slaughter. What if tonight in this group of people God struck down 70? What would we call that? It's a great slaughter. And so it is a subjective term, but that would fit with 50,000. That would certainly be a great slaughter. And so, yeah, those... Right. He could have. Exactly, yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. When the Assyrians were encamped against Jerusalem, one angel took out 186,000 of their soldiers in one night. And so, yes, you're right. That's not certainly. The idea that 50,000 were struck dead is certainly not something that, oh, that's just too many. That would never, there's no way that's would be a problem with God. Yeah. What could 12 legions do? Yeah. Yeah. Right. So what's he saying? He's saying God can handle this. I don't need Peter, I don't need your sword. God can handle this. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah. All right. So 50,000, 70. You can look at that. And I encourage you, if you to go to the AP website. There it is again down at the bottom. AP apologeticspress.org is the website. You can just type in Apologetics Press on your computer, and you can find it. And look up that article. There's also another link inside that article to a more general article that he wrote about the idea of textual variants, copyist errors, and it's written in layman's terms. It's written so that we can understand what he's talking about. Doesn't get into the real technical language, all that kind of stuff. It can be very helpful if you have questions about those things to go to that. So the last slide on this, regardless of the number, whether it's 50,000, 70, or whether it's 70, here's the point that we need to take from that passage, and that is that God's holiness should never be taken casually. Those men, however many it was, died because they were irreverent toward God. They treated the Ark of the Covenant. Think about what he's just done to the Philistines, because they have the Ark in their possession. He made it clear that their God is nothing. Dagon was, prostrate before the Ark twice, and the second time his limbs and his head were severed. Many of the people were struck by those tumors, whatever that refers to. I mean, it was evident to those people that they did not want to mess with the God of Israel. And yet now the ark comes back to Israel, and they knew better. They had been taught not to do this, and yet they treat the ark as just something that's just something that to treat casually, something that's just kind of a neat thing to look at. And so their irreverence toward the ark results in God's reminder, very sobering reminder, that his holiness is to be taken seriously. Yeah, it's like a tourist attraction. Come see the ark. Come see what's in the ark. You may never have this chance again. And that's certainly true for a bunch of them. David? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And even without using flippant language like that, we can be guilty of it if we're not careful. I mean, it is true that God is our Father, and He is willing to have that communion with us, but we are not on the same level. It is nowhere close to that, and we need to recognize there has to be that balance between the reverence and at the same time the familiarity that God allows. Yeah, I mean, how many times do you hear people, you're exactly right, talk about, God and I have an agreement. What does that mean? It means I'm going to do what I want to do and feel good about it because, I'm just going to think, well, God's going to be okay with that. you're right, they haven't studied this like they should have. All right, anything else real quick before we move on to chapters 8 through 12? All right, let's start with a map. And I don't know how well you can see this. It's just really hard to get a map up there good that covers enough. But inside the red dotted line is basically the area of the kingdom of Saul during his lifetime, during his kingship, during the 40 years that he was king. You'll see places like, there's Ramah, that's Samuel's hometown. Just right here close by it is Gibeah, and that's where Saul is from. That's where Kish, the father of Saul, lives, and that's where he grew up. And that's going to be important and something we say in a few minutes. Mizpah is right there. Bethel is a place that you hear quite often, and all of that is just north of Jerusalem. All of this area, though, you're going to be seeing places there during the time that we look at the kingship of Saul. All right, so these 5 chapters, 8 through 12, are a narrative that tells us about the transition. This is a very crucial time in Israel because it's a transition from the judges to the kings. Of course, Samuel is the last judge, and Saul is the first king. And that happens within these chapters. And you see something that you've seen from the very beginning of the nation of Israel. God's faithfulness and their unfaithfulness. And their unfaithfulness just continues. So in chapter 8, we're going to see Israel demanding a king. So they come to Samuel, and look, Samuel, you're now old. And he has placed his 2 sons, Joel and Abijah, as judges. But what's wrong with these 2 sons? They were not faithful. They're not walking in the footsteps of Samuel. They're not like him at all. They're a whole lot more like the sons of Eli. They take bribes. They pervert justice. And so the elders of Israel, these would be the leaders of the tribes, they come to Samuel. Say, we can't do this. And what their request is, we want a king. Give us a king like the nations around us have a king. Now, before you go any further, when you look at the unfaithfulness of Samuel's sons, which is a replay of what happened with Eli, this request kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Because we need something different. This is not working. But there's a problem with this. First of all, Samuel is very upset when they make this request. It's almost like he got his feelings hurt. And so he does something that is extremely important. When he gets the request from the people, the next thing he does is he goes to God in prayer. And he takes that to God. And God's response was, you give them what they're asking for because they've not rejected you. Samuel, it seems you're taking this personally, but this is not what's happening. They haven't rejected you, they've rejected me, is what God tells him. And God says you give them what they're asking for. Because who is it that's really being rejected here? It's God. Now, hold your place there at chapter 8 and go over to chapter 12. And this is in Samuel's final charge to Israel. This is the last thing we hear from Samuel as far as his speaking to the nation. And he kind of goes back, go all the way back to verse 6. He basically says what Stephen is going to say in Acts 7. Because Stephen says, you do always resist the Holy Spirit the way your fathers did. And Samuel says basically the same thing. This is just nothing more than what Israel has always done. You've always rejected God. But this is something even worse. Go back to down to verse 11. This is when, during the period of the judges, the people would turn away from God, and God would allow them to be oppressed by the nations around them. He mentions in specific Sisera in the Philistines. And I'm in chapter 12. Well, Sisera's in verse 9. And now this is what they would normally do during the period of the judges. They would say, "We have sinned." And they would cry out for deliverance. And when they sinned and then cried out for deliverance and repentance, what would God raise up? A judge. And Samuel mentions them in verse 11. He sent you Jerubbabel, Bedan, Jephthah, and Samuel. Here's another one of those places where some of the manuscripts read differently. Jerubbabel is Gideon. Bedan, some of the manuscripts say Barak. Jephthah and Samuel, some of the manuscripts say Samson. Don't get all bogged down in that. Who are these people, regardless of the names? Judges. And so Samuel says, this is what we've done in the past. We would turn away from God, we'd sin, but recognize the need to come back to Him and cry out for deliverance, and He'd raise a judge, and that judge would deliver you. And then in your faithfulness, you would be blessed for a period of time, and then it would start all over again. But look at what's different this time. In verse number 13, verse number 12. And when you saw that Nahash, king of the Ammonites, came against you, that's what's happening right now. You said to me, "No, but a king shall reign over us, when the Lord your God was your king." You see what they're doing this time? Instead of crying out to God, "Okay, we've sinned, we know we need to change, we want to come back to you, please deliver us," you've got a better idea. We don't have to repent, we don't have to turn back to God, we just need us a king. If we had a king like the nations around us, this would not be happening to us. And in so doing, they have rejected their king. As we've made the point numerous times. In the book of Judges, you have the phrase, there was no king in Israel in those days, and every man did that which was right in his own eyes. They had a king, but they didn't recognize him. And that's exactly what happened here in 1 Samuel 8 through 12. They had a king, but they rejected him. Now, let's go back to chapter 8 now. So we're now back in chapter 8, verse 10. Samuel is now going to tell them what God wanted him to say. And what God wanted him to tell them is, your king, when you get a king, and it's coming, he will take from you. He'll take a tithe. He'll take your land. He'll take your children. He'll take your servants and your animals, and he will use them for himself. He'll take. In fact, numerous times in these words from Samuel, he says, he'll take. What had God been doing? God was giving. God gave them the land. God gave them bounty when they were faithful. God gave, but the king is going to take. So much so that when you get down to verse 17, they're going to be right back where they were in Egypt. He said, you will be his servants. And you will cry out to me for deliverance. But it's not going to come. Because you are reaping from what you have sown. And you're getting what you've asked for. And so before it even happens, Samuel says, this is what's going to take place. Verse 19, nevertheless the people refused, said, no, but we will have a king over us, that we may be like all the nations, that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. So this passage gives us the reality of what king they were going to have over them. Either a visible king or an invisible king. Of course, the invisible king is God. God who blessed them, God who cared for them, God who provided, God who held them accountable, but God who provided their needs. Or a king like the nations. And they said, that's what we want. Now, a takeaway from that, misplaced desire is going to lead to misplaced trust. If I just had, and you fill in the blank, if I just had, everything would be fine. If I just had that new job that paid more money, everything would be fine. Or if I just had that new car, I get rid of this old rattle trap, everything would be fine. If we just had a king like the nations around us, all of this stuff wouldn't be happening to us. And they put their trust in the wrong thing. When we put our trust in God, then that will affect the things we desire. And they had it backwards. They had their desires first, and then they put their trust in those things rather than putting trust in God. And we can fall into that same trap if we're not careful. All right, anything else over chapter 8? All right, I'll put chapters 9 and 10 together. You have Saul being chosen. He's anointed, and then eventually he will be coronated by all of Israel. But it's interesting, even though the people have rejected God in essence, he responds in a gracious way, and he gives them a king. But he chooses the very kind of king that they've asked for. Now, chapter 9 opens with the kind of the genealogical record of Saul. There was a man in Benjamin. His name was Kish. We're given his father, grandfather, and so forth. And we're told he was a man of power. And he had a son. He was handsome. He was choice. In fact, there was not a more handsome person among all the children of Israel. And he was taller from his shoulders upward than everybody else. His name was Saul. Now, what follows next is a number of things that all work together to result in Saul being anointed king of Israel. He starts out, the donkeys of his father Kish are missing. They've gone missing. How many of you own donkeys? Raise your hands. Got 2. Steve, you can raise your hand. Don't you have a donkey? All right. This is the same donkey, right? Yeah. What's your impression of a donkey if you don't have one? Just kind of a novelty, isn't it? So people have donkeys. Doug, are donkeys useful? They can be, can't they? We live in a society very different from these people. To say your donkey's missing would be like your tractor's gone. Or, something else that you depend on. I guess I should ask how many of you have tractors. A few more than have donkeys, but still, your car's missing, right? Or your computer is gone, or your phone's missing. All right, now you understand what I'm talking about. This is something that they depended on, okay? So it's missing. And so Kish tells Saul, hey, can you go find the donkeys? So he takes a servant with him. They go looking for the donkeys. They're gone quite a while, and they can't find them. In the meantime, the servant says, hey, there's a prophet here close by. Maybe we should go ask him, and he could help us. Now, listen to this. Saul had no idea about the prophet. Do you remember me talking about on the map how close Ramah and Gibeah are? They're just real close. I think it's like a 5-mile difference from one to the other. He had no idea about the prophet. Do you remember who the prophet was? Samuel. Have you ever heard of him? Samuel was a well-known prophet throughout all of Israel. And here's a man who had grown up 5 miles away from him. He didn't know about him. Didn't know who he was. What does that tell you about Saul's spiritual mindset? Not very deep. Very shallow. There's strike one against Saul. Here's a man like the nations round about. And so they go to Samuel, and Samuel has already been told. God has told Samuel, I'm going to send to you a man from Benjamin, and you will anoint him king over Israel. So, make the long story short, he comes, he meets them. Samuel is going up to the high place where sacrifices would be made, and they're going to have a feast, and he makes Saul like the guest of honor, and he eats at the feast. He's had food set aside for the guest, and he gives that to Saul. As they're leaving, Saul and Samuel alone, the servant is sent away, and he anoints him king of Israel. Nobody else knows about it at this point. Saul gets home, but on the way, Samuel says, you're going to see some things. First of all, there'll be 3 prophets, and they're carrying things for sacrifice. They're carrying bread. They're carrying wine. They're going to give you 2 loaves of bread. You'll be told that the donkeys have been found, but your father is worried about you. And all of these things happen, just like Samuel said they would happen. And Saul gets home, and he's asked about what happened. And he tells part of it, but he does not tell that he's been anointed king. He keeps that to himself. These signs, all of these things that happen are just very normal. He's looking for donkeys. He doesn't find them. He runs across the prophet. He eats at a feast. He meets some of the sons of the prophets. He's given loaves of bread. There's nothing miraculous about any of that, except Samuel told him all of these things would happen. Now, if somebody was able to tell you what you're going to do tomorrow and tidbits of information like that, how could they do that? I mean, it'd be impossible. Even to the point that you may have plans for tomorrow, but they may not happen just like you want them to happen, right? Sometimes you don't get to do what you want to do. But Samuel was able to tell Saul all of these things because God had given him that information. And it gives credence to Samuel, his position, and what he's doing with Saul. When you get on down to the 10th chapter, Samuel has called all of Israel together, and he begins with the tribe, then he goes down to the family, and finally he identifies Saul. And this is the man that God has chosen as your king. How many of you seen the movie Sound of Music? You remember the Sound of Music? You remember at the festival, and the family's going to leave Austria that night, and so they're going through 3rd place and 2nd place, and finally get to 1st place, and it's the Von Trapp family, and so they announce them, and the spotlight goes over, and there's nobody there. And they do it again, there's nobody there. Finally, they realize they've left. That came to my mind when thinking about Saul. So here's the man who's chosen king. But he's not there. They have to look for him. Where'd they find him? The King James says among the baggage or the equipment. He's hiding. This is the man that has been selected as their king. And one of the things that you can learn from that is God is going to work even through flawed human choices. Everything is not always exactly the way it ought to be, but God can use that. And here's a man that is not the spiritual giant that the people need. But in his being chosen king, they learn something about what they need in a king. And we need to recognize that whatever is going on, God can use that to his glory. Go back to the chapter before it. We need to trust in him rather than in ourselves. All right. Anything about chapters 9 or 10 that I may have missed that you want to point out, or a question or comment about that? All right, we've got just a few minutes. Go ahead and look at chapter 11. You have Saul's first victory. Now, in the course of these events, we're introduced to Nahash. We mentioned him earlier in chapter 12. Nahash of the Ammonites. He has come up and encamped against Jabesh Gilead. On the map, if you look to the east of the Jordan River, you'll find the city of Jabesh Gilead. And he says to the men of Jabesh, or the people of Jabesh said to him, "Make us a covenant, we'll serve you." The reason they did that is because he has been victorious over others. And his strength has been evident. It's like we can't fight against him, so it's like, let's make a covenant. We'll serve you, but don't kill us. And what's his? He's willing to do so, but what are his conditions? Got to put out your right eye. Now, why would he want to put out their right eye? Most people are right eye dominant. But what do most men in those days do with their right eye? They use it to, like if you're going to shoot a bow and arrow, you're going to use it as a sight. They didn't have guns, but you would use it to sight. That would make them weak when it came to warfare. And therefore, he would not have any opposition from them. That's his idea. In fact, some of the things I've read said that it was a common practice of these people to do that to those whom they conquered. And so the men said, "Give us a week to find somebody to help us." Show you the arrogance of Nahash. He says, "Sure, take a week. See if you can find anybody." It's almost like he's taunting them. Like, you're not going to find anybody to help you. And if you find somebody, I can still defeat them. So go ahead and find somebody. Well, they find somebody. They find Saul. And they muster an army. And how many people did he find in his army? I'm going to be careful with the numbers because I got the number wrong. 330,000. This is in verse 8. And he divides them into 3 groups. And they attack Nahash early in the morning, at the first watch. And they defeat him. Now, why did Israel defeat the Ammonites? Because God was with them. There's a statement back in chapter 9. And we'll come back to that because we're not going to have time tonight because the buzzer's about to sound. I didn't get it out quick. But look for this back in chapter 9. 9 and 10. It's either 9 or 10. When the Spirit came upon, it's in chapter 10. The Spirit came upon Saul. That's where I want to start next week and look at how God used Saul and how that phrase indicates that. And a part of that is going to be in the victory over the Ammonites. All right, so put a peg down right there, and that's where we'll start next week. Yes, ma'am. If you will, take a songbook and turn to number 240. 240. Dusty will lead that in just a moment. At the close of our service tonight, Danny Suzunas has our closing prayer. Good to see each of you tonight. We have a few that we need to mention on our sick list. A couple of surgeries coming up Friday. Doug Gullion was supposed to have surgery Monday. They had to postpone that because of the weather. He'll be doing that Friday. Also, David Dunaway undergoing surgery on Friday of this week. Keep both of them in your prayers as they deal with that. Ari Anderson is at home sick tonight. Also, remember we mentioned this Sunday morning, Hannah Weichert will be going to the doctor in a couple of weeks, but keep her in your prayers. Good to see Regina Suttles back with us tonight. She was out for a while after a fall. Are there others that we need to add to our sick list tonight? All right. A couple of things coming up. This Friday night is the youth group kickoff. It's at 5:30 here at the fellowship hall. Jonathan says he needs a head count. If you plan to come, if you have not signed up, be sure and do that so he'll be able to know how many. This is for not just our young people, but also their parents. And he also said you don't have to have kids. If you're interested in what the youth group does, you're welcome to come. Just make sure that you let him know that you plan to be here so they can prepare the food and so forth. That's 5:30 this Friday night. Also remember this coming Sunday night we'll be hosting the area-wide youth devotional. Remember the time change to 5 p.m. Eric Cheney from the Priceville congregation will be the speaker, and there will be refreshments afterward. So remember that Sunday night, 5 p.m. for the area-wide. And we've mentioned Ruby Brad, who was her oldest brother is married to Joey and Tammy Treat's daughter. Ruby had been fighting cancer for a number of years. It returned not too long ago, and she passed away yesterday. And so be sure and keep that family in your prayers as they deal with her passing. That's all that I've got right now for announcements. If there's something we do need to mention, we'll do that before we have our closing prayer tonight. The song that Dusty has selected, Have Thine Own Way, Lord. We're in a study here in the auditorium on Wednesday night from the books of First and Second Samuel. And right now we're in the part of 1 Samuel where Saul has been anointed king of Israel. And if you know anything at all about the Bible, about the Old Testament, you know that Saul is a very tragic character in the Bible. He is introduced with such wonderful, he is from a prominent family in Benjamin. He is, in fact, the passage says there was no one more handsome in Israel than he. He was head and shoulders taller than everybody else around him. And he starts with such promise. We studied tonight about the very first victory that he had over the Ammonites. And yet you know before long what is going to happen to Saul. And what this song has to do with is really at the heart of his problem. He did not allow God to have his way. But at every step, Saul interjects what he wants. And he does what he pleases. And it leads to his ruin. A very tragic life indeed. But what Saul did, you and I can be guilty of. Is we can follow our own way. And we can do what pleases us. And we can do what we think is best. And we can make the same mistake that he made. Tonight as we sing this song, we should think seriously about the words that we're singing. And how this ought to be the sentiment of our heart. And if it is not what you think, if it's not the way you're leading your life, change that tonight. If you need to confess wrongdoing as a Christian, We'll pray with you and for you if you need to be obedient to the gospel tonight. Because it is impossible to let God have his way with you if you're not a child of God. If you need to respond to the Lord's invitation, I want you to do it right now while we stand, while we sing. I didn't write this down, so I didn't remember it. In case you do not know already, Luke and Savannah Nordvik been visiting with us for a number of months. They sit kind of toward the back on this side. She had been expecting. The baby was born this past weekend. They came home from the hospital Monday. It was a little boy. I say little. He was 9 pounds, 10 ounces. But everybody's doing well. We're certainly thankful for that. Keep them in your prayers as well.
Let us pray. Father, thank you for another opportunity to come and learn from your word. We ask you to be with those who are sick, who could not be here. We ask you to be with those who are undergoing surgeries, medical procedures. We pray that those go well. Help us to remember, Father, your holiness. Help us to remember that obedience to you is important, that you are God and that we are not. We thank you for your grace and your mercy. We thank you for your Son and his sacrifice. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.